Our Father, which art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thine kingdom come, thine will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our debt as we forgive our debtors. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power and the glory forever. Amen.
I tell you, after listening to some of the opening comments, Pastor Green should be feeling really good, because one lady got up here and remembered part of a sermon that had been given about a week and a half ago. They tell us that when we preach, most of you walk out of here and do not remember what the sermon was about within 2 or 3 minutes. And to remember something, part of it, a week and a half later is really different. To remember that tithing formula to help keep the bugs and things away from their crops in Oklahoma was something to remember all there, and that we could remember it. Sometimes I don't remember everything. I hope that you did read the bulletin and notice that there is a film tonight. We're going to try to make it the second Sabbath every month a film night or a fun night here for a while, where we can come and have some popcorn, some nuts, and some other things there, but that we might could eat. But we're going to show the film first and then go back here and eat and enjoy things for a little bit. Since the sun's setting so early, we have a Saturday night to do something, you know? And so we're going to try to do that tonight. And the film tonight is the story of Dr. Ben Carson. And also, there was a transfer of membership of a couple of people, and I would like to just do one vote on it where it's voted today, because we know these people and they can be here and out of here, okay? You understand that? Some are going to go. The Westbergs are going to go. The Stands are going to come in to our church, and I'm wondering if we could have a motion that these people go and come. We got a motion. Is there a second? We got a second over there. All of you that are in favor, raise your hand. Okay, if you'll let Lydia Bush, I'll try to, know that all of this has been taken care of and that she can take care of it when she gets back in town. Friend of mine grew up in New York City. I don't know if you've been to New York City, but one of the ways they have of getting around in New York City is what they call trains or subways. And there is always subways going and coming and going and going and coming and going and going and going and coming. One Sabbath he went to church and this good-looking woman walked in. Now, he was a teenager, but she came in and he stood over there and his eyes focused on that good-looking woman and he said, whew. And so he moved over closer to the wall and he leaned against it and he went, whoo. You ladies don't kind of understand, that's man talk, or wow, you know. Whoo. And then he moved over to another corner because she moved and he got over to another corner and he went, oh. And then after church, she left the church and he kind of followed her and she got on a subway and he got on the subway where she got on the subway. And they went an hour and a half in the opposite direction of his home. That's real smart. But as he was riding that subway, he got a little closer to her and a little closer to her, and he began to talk to her. Whew. He didn't have a lot to say, but whoo. But she talked for a little bit. And then they got on a bus and rode it for a ways till she got home. And then he walked back to the bus stop. Whoa. And they rode the bus to the subway and he got on the subway. And he rode the subway all the way back to where he got on. But he had to change to another subway to get back home, which was an hour away. And all the way he said, oh, ooh. It is interesting, but this man, John, rode the subway like that for several months with that girl going an hour and a half out of his way just to talk to her. And sometimes they would let 6 subways go by before they got on so that they could just talk. Oh, it was an enjoyable time for both of them. And then he'd ride the subway and the bus all the way back to where he lived. And oh, it was wonderful. This went on for months and months. They found the subway a perfectly good place to talk and visit with each other and get close to each other. And they enjoyed it so much that they didn't realize how much time had passed. John and the young girl had started a relationship. And that relationship grew and grew until John married that good-looking girl. It started with a relationship and a, ooh, wow. I know some of y'all here have kind of been in a situation maybe a little bit like that. Maybe you didn't waste as much time, have as much time to waste or whatever it is on the subway, but you had some time like that. I was reading here this week where a fellow works for a big company that goes around and checks on people. And that's his job, is to make sure that they check on people. And he has a cell phone. And that cell phone rings all the time, but he travels all over the world to listen what they're finding out about people. Now, he carries another cell phone that only has his family's phone numbers in there. Got one for his son, 2 for each one of the daughters, 1 for the wife. And it's interesting, when that cell phone rings, no matter what he does, he puts it on just where everything comes across, speaker, or recording, and it just comes across. But he answers the phone where the family is calling, and oh, he loves talking to the family. Now, he is not home very much. Maybe a day, maybe a half a day, sometimes 2 days is he's home. But he does have the cell phone, and whenever they call, he answers it. And then sometimes he calls them, and oh, how he loves to talk to them. And it's interesting, just with that cell phone, they have a very close relationship. Even though he's not at home, he is still daddy. And he's still the husband that the woman loved. And she is still the wife that he loved, just because of the cell phone. About 2,000 years ago, Jesus Christ left this earth. We studied about that a little bit in the Sabbath school lesson. He was resurrected, right? And 40 days later, he went back to heaven. Now, can you imagine what it must have been like for those who were his disciples? Jesus leaves about 31 AD and goes back to heaven. And we have the book of Mark, probably the first gospel that was printed and made up and copied. And the thing about it is, it was not printed on a press where everybody had it there and they could get it the next night when they came out, like when we had the meetings. You know how we could just come and pick it up? We had pages and pages and pages of things that we could pick up every night at the meetings. The book of Mark wasn't that way. Peter probably told Mark the things that happened as he was a disciple of Jesus, as written down in the book of Mark. And the book of Mark was probably written around 45 AD. 40 to 45 AD. That's several years after Jesus went back to heaven. Peter is telling the story. And when Peter is telling the story, you get the idea that Jesus is just like maybe one of those comic books that we used to have, like the Superman. Everything he did was wonderful. He could run faster than anybody else. He could jump higher buildings. He could do all of these things, because we find in the book of Mark, Peter is telling the story, Jesus could do everything. He could touch people and heal them. He could tell them the devil to get out, and they were leaving these people that he was casting demons out of. All of these things were happening because Peter was picturing it from his point of view. Jesus was somebody magnificent. Think about having a book like that to read. Think about that it wasn't going to everybody in the church. There weren't a whole bunch of copies over here that you could just pick up when you left. There was one circulating a few places. And then somebody copied that one. And then there were two circulating a few places. And then somebody else copied that one. And let me tell you something. Back then, copying a book was a lot of work. My wife used to write, well, I don't say she write. She used to type papers for people who were getting master's degrees and doctoral degrees. And back then, they had the typewriter. And we did not have the electric typewriter yet. She had a little typewriter that was in a little case, and she'd hit it when she'd get to the end, and she'd go back, and she'd type, and then go hit it, and go back, and type. And if she made a mistake, she had to take that paper and get rid of it, because no paper could have an erase mark on the paper. And it couldn't have a whiteout mark on the paper. They hadn't got that yet either, invented the whiteout mark when we were in school like that. And she was typing all of those things. Folks, let me tell you something. Back when the Bible was written, they couldn't even put a piece of carbon in there and have a second copy. Few of those were around. And then Matthew wrote a book. Luke came along and did a talk with some of the people, and he wrote a book. All of these, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, were all written before Jerusalem was destroyed, before 70 A.D. And they weren't all over the place. They had some that had been copied and passed around, but they weren't all over the place. Now, Jesus had gone back to heaven. There were people who were joining what we call the church at that time when we read in the book of Acts. 50 days after Jesus went back to heaven, they had Pentecost. Did you hear about that day? That's when Peter preached, and there were thousands that were baptized into the church on one day. Can you imagine having 120 members? A few more than what we got in this church, but not all of you are here. But a few more than what we got here. 120 people were in the church, and then they baptized thousands in one day who joined the church. Can you imagine what that was like? 50 days after Jesus goes back to heaven? Can you imagine what those 12 disciples had on their hands trying to share Jesus Christ, Him crucified, risen, and He's coming again? They were sharing it with everybody. And the thing that was amazing, people heard it in their own language. That was happening. And they were challenged to go out of Jerusalem and share it in Judea and in Samaria and into the uttermost parts of the world. Folks, they gave it to the other people to go and share the good news. But there wasn't any written copy. There wasn't a whole bunch of slides you could put on a screen and the people could read about it for themselves. They had to go and tell and share it so that the world could know. And then there was a fellow that was in the church by the name of Saul. And he was going around and he was taking people to jail. He was taking whole families to jail. Many of them were dying in jail. Many of them were being killed in jail. He even came out where they were going to stone one of the deacons in the church. And some of the church members were around. And he stood there and he held the coats for the ones who were going to throw the rocks. Can you imagine what's going on? Think if they came in here and they were to come into this church and they were supposed to pick up Tim back there. He's one of the deacons, one of the bigger deacons. And they take him outside to stone him. What would we do? But they take Stephen out there. Saul of Tarsus is there. Somehow or another, the Lord impresses on his mind right then that this is not the right thing, as Stephen shares with them that he sees heaven opening and things. A few months later, Saul of Tarsus is on the road to Damascus, and he's struck down. But that's not what I want to talk to you about. I just want you to think about that early church. Not everybody had a Bible at home on their coffee table. Not everybody had a phone that they could reach into their pocket and call up Bible verses that they could find out what Jesus had done just today or what He did a year ago. They didn't have a phone that they could pick up and pull out and it would repeat some Bible text from the Old Testament. They didn't have that. There was none of that there. By 70 AD, before Jerusalem was destroyed, almost all of the disciples were dead. The first ones who had seen Jesus, touched Jesus, eaten dinner with Jesus, knew what he was like, felt his scars in his side and in his hands, and heard stories from him. All of them were dead, but one. Even the Apostle Paul was dead. Peter was dead. The only one that is alive around 98, 99, 100 AD comes up is John the Beloved. He's the only one that's alive. And folks, I want to share something with you. He was an old man. He was an old man. And he could see the church. He could read the things that the disciples had left. Probably still had maybe a piece of the Old Testament with him, and he knew what they had said. But folks, here is an old man, almost 100 years old. And he feels impressed by God to write the book of John. It's interesting as you read in the book of John, John talks about what Jesus Christ did. He doesn't have Jesus Christ going around laying hands on people, but he has Jesus Christ telling them what to do. And people have to follow his words. The first miracle that John has written in the book of John is Jesus is taking water and turning it into wine. You remember that story? Now, Mary tells the people that are the servants in the house, says, whatever he says, do it. Notice, whatever he says, do it. Jesus tells them to take those vessels and to fill them up with water. He doesn't touch it. Doesn't even go over and say a blessing on it. He just says, fill it up with water. And then after it's filled with water, he says, take a cup of it and give it to the person who's in charge of this wedding reception. And they take that cup and he drinks of it and he says, man, this is the best wine I've ever tasted in all my life. John writes this letter telling people to listen to what Jesus says. The next parable that he has there in the book of John, he meets a woman at a well. And he says, would you put your vessel down and get me a drink? She says, why are you asking me? I'm a Jew. I mean, you're a Jew. I'm a Samaritan. Jews don't ask Samaritans for any favors. And then Jesus says, after he talks to her for a while, he says, why don't you go call your husband? I don't have one of those. And then Jesus says to her, you're right. He's told the truth. You have 5. How would you feel as a woman if some strange man all of a sudden said, you're right, you don't have one, you got 5? And then he says, now Go and call your friends and tell them that I have something I want to share with you. Notice in that story, Jesus doesn't touch her. He says, go and tell. And I can tell you, when a woman like that had stories to tell, she went back into that village and she simply said, hey, guys, you need to come and hear what this man is telling me. He has told me such things that I have never heard before. There were probably more than 5 that came running, but the women came too. She told what he had shared with her, and they came. Are you getting kind of the idea here? Jesus in the book of John. John's writing the book of John, but Jesus is telling people what to do, and people are responding to what he tells them to do. Folks, when Jesus went back to heaven, after a period of time, there were no people there who had seen him, touched him, and tasted things that he had blessed. John was an old man, and he was emphasizing the fact, listen to what he says and do what he says. The book of John is filled with that. Jesus goes and he does touch a man. He makes some clay. He finds a blind man. He makes some clay. And he asks him, what do you see? Well, I just see, looks like a bunch of trees walking around. And then Jesus touches him again on the eyes. But notice what Jesus says. He doesn't see from being touched. He doesn't see from having the clay. Jesus tells him, go and wash. It wasn't an instant healing. He was told to go and wash. And then he was able to see. Folks, when we look at the book of John, John is telling you and me we need to listen to the Savior. We need to follow the words that the Savior is saying. We get to the 11th chapter there, and it's just a week before Jesus is crucified, and he goes into Bethany. His favorite friend has died, and I say his favorite friend. I have to say, I think he's his favorite friend. Folks, let me tell you something. Jesus went to Mary and Martha's house quite often. And they ate there quite often. Let me tell you something. Somebody had to see that there was food in that house. Women usually didn't go out and work then and have money to bring home so that there'd be food in the house. Lazarus was the one that was providing that food that Martha was cooking. And Mary was helping a little bit. Did you ever think of that? Lazarus is the one that was providing that food that Jesus and his 12 disciples, if we have somebody over at our house, 1 or 2 is a crowd. 5 or 6 is too many. But they had 12 that came in, at least. And they ate there. And folks, men, and especially after they've probably haven't had a whole lot to eat, they probably kind of laid back, and that's kind of the way they ate then, was kind of laying back and reclining. They ate their fill. Lazarus is the one that provided that food. And Jesus gets a message that he's dead. But folks, Jesus goes there and he comes to the tomb. He asks Mary and Martha to take him to the tomb. And he gets there to the tomb. And when he gets there, he doesn't go up and touch Lazarus. He tells them to roll the stone away, and they say, well, he's already stinking, it's going to be bad. But he tells them to roll the stone away. We studied about resurrection this morning. It's really nothing to Jesus, but Jesus calls Lazarus forth from that grave. He doesn't touch him. He just says, Lazarus, come forth. And Lazarus came forth. When you and I read the book of John, we find a Jesus that is talking and telling people what to do, and people have to respond to his voice and do what he asks them to do. I just want to share with you some things that you and I need to do. Jesus probably not going to come down here and touch us. He's probably not going to come down here and we're going to see him prepare food before us and break it up and we're going to eat of it. He's not going to do that. But Jesus wants to have a relationship with us. You and I have to work at having that relationship with Jesus Christ. Now, one of the best things that we can do to have that relationship with Jesus Christ is to start praying. Folks, if you don't know how to pray, you need to start praying. And sometimes it is difficult to pray. I remember the last church I pastored before I got retired. I had a lady there in the church, and we met to have prayer at the church in the mornings before Sabbath school in church. And I asked everybody to get two together, just two of you get together and pray. And she looked at me. I was with her. I put us together. And she says, Pastor, I have never prayed with anybody but my husband. Well, that was good. At least I knew that she'd prayed with her husband. And I said, well, could you now pray with me? And she says, I don't know how to do that. Now, she was a lady that worked at home, out in the garden, helping her husband do things. She took my hands. She began to pray, and my hands began to get smaller and smaller as she clutched my hands and she prayed. Gradually, her hands moved up to where they got my arm, my wrist, and she began to pull on them. And as she held on them, it was so tight that the blood stopped running into my hands. Then it was my turn to pray, and she relaxed. Several years later, probably a couple years later, she came to me and said, Pastor Tennell, I want us to start going over to the prison over here and doing prison work. And I looked at her, and I said, and I called her by name, I can't do that. I said, I already have 500 members here in this church. And I got so many things going on in this church with these 500 members that I don't have time to do anything in that prison. She says, well, I want to get it started. I said, if you want to get it started, you get it started. You get the people to help you. And if you need any money, I'll see that you get the money. She says, that's a deal. I didn't realize how fast she could work. But just in a short time, she had 4 or 5 people to help her, and the head elder to help her, and some other folks. And they came to me and said, we need some money. And I said, okay. And I made sure that they got the money. And then they went out there and they worked to get permission. And I want you to know, it's hard to get in prisons if you haven't done anything. Now, if you've done something, you get in a little easier. But if you haven't done anything, it's hard to get in there. And they made her take a lot of classes, and the other people with her, and they said, and your pastor has to come and take these too. And so I had to go and take those too. I didn't have time for it, but if they were going to get in, I had to do it. And so I went and took the classes. And then they came and they told us things we could do in there and things we couldn't do in there. And now we were going to be checked and all of that stuff. And the first night that we went in, she made sure that I got in. We went in, and as I heard the gates close, 1 gate closed, 2 gates closed, 3 gates closed, and the 4th gate closed, I knew I was in. It's a wonderful place to be. But that woman that couldn't pray, with those prisoners, about 40 to 50 of them. Now, there were over 100 that were in this one. It was a medical hospital prison. But she began to pray for those people. She went up close to them and touched them and prayed for them. They heard her prayers. She shared Bible verses with them. She shared Bibles with them. She shared different pieces of literature with them. And once a month, she would make sure her pastor got in and come and preach to those people. Can you see how she got a relationship started by praying, and a relationship by praying with those prisoners, and then a relationship with the guards and Pastor Tennell, so that he had to go and share Jesus Christ in those prisons? Did you know that there are things that you can do that even us pastors say, I don't have time for, but it comes around that we find time for it? Folks, but it starts with you. John emphasized that Jesus wants to have a relationship with you. And the way it starts is with you communicating with Jesus Christ. Now let me tell you something. With prayer, you don't have to be kneeling on your knees to pray. You can be laying in bed praying. You can ride in your car and tell Jesus to sit over there and pray and talk to Him while He's sitting over there riding with you. Don't scare Him now. But He's over there riding with you and you're talking to Him. You can pray while you're at your table. You can pray anytime. And one of the things that you need to try to learn to do is, as you pray with Jesus, is write some of those prayers down. I have a friend that writes all of his prayers down that he can remember every day. And then at the end of the year, in January, he sits down on January 1 and he reads every day all the prayers that he's prayed, and he checks off the ones that Jesus, that he knows of, has already answered. Every January. Wow. What a way to spend January 1. Reading your prayers and checking them off. Spend time learning to have a relationship with Jesus Christ. His words are important to us. John is trying to emphasize that in the book of John. Listen to the words. Now, there's part of John that's really hard. The thing about it is, if you listen to John and you listen to Jesus, one of the things Jesus makes very plain in John the 17th chapter, I don't know if you've read it, but in John the 17th chapter, he's praying for his disciples that he has right then. But he says, Lord, I want you to be with these, but I want you to remember the ones that these people are going to lead to you. If you've read the book of John, if you've read the book of Mark, if you've read the book of Matthew, if you've read Luke, if you've read the writings of Paul, you've listened to the words of those who claim to be disciples of Jesus Christ. And if you're walking any bit in the line the way Jesus Christ is wanting you to walk, right now, Jesus Christ is saying, I want you to be my disciples. And folks, when you read the scripture, God is not happy with us if we just are doing things at home. Now, I know some things have to be done at home, but He wants us to get out and relate Jesus Christ to other people outside the home. Now, I know that's hard for some of us because, like I said this morning, when she asked the question, why don't more of us do it? Number one reason I don't do it is because I'm embarrassed. I'm afraid somebody will laugh at me. They'll think I'm funny. Now, I don't mind y'all laughing at me because I know you already know that I'm kind of funny and kind of off on one side. But I don't like people that don't know me to start laughing at me. You know, it just makes me feel funny. But the thing about it is, folks, if I can't do something for Jesus Christ, even if somebody's going to laugh at me, I'm not really there, am I? Some of you maybe don't do some things for Jesus Christ because you're bashful. You really don't like talking to people. You don't want to share anything with them. And some of you are going to say, well, I don't have anything to share. Let me tell you something. What did the woman at the well have to share? She didn't have any 2300-day prophecy. She didn't have the state of the dead down. She didn't have the idea that you're saved by grace through faith in Jesus Christ and had sanctification, justification, and glorification. She didn't have all of that down. What did she have? She had a story. And the book of Revelation says we are to go and share our testimony. Now, you know, some of us would say she had a checkered past. Boy, howdy. Some newspapers would really like to have that one. And it's interesting, some of the things that gets written up in the Braselton newspaper, it's just a little one, but some of the things that get written up in there, you know, two women are fighting each other. We don't know for sure what they're fighting each other about, but they're had a brawl out there, and now both of them are in jail. Boy, howdy, wouldn't you like to know for sure who those two women were so you could tell that tale? And especially Ellie and me, because we both live here in the Braselton-Houston area. We're kind of right here, you know. Wouldn't we like to know who they are? And, you know, some lady got over here at the filling station and she just drove off without paying for her gasoline. And the policeman stopped her before she got out. We'd really like to know who she was too. You know, one of the things that's interesting when you read the Braselton newspaper is a lot of the people that are in the Braselton newspaper doing things wrong are women. Those guys aren't even on the front page. You know, lots of places, guys are on the front pages, you know. They're shooting each other. Here, it's just women. They're doing some of the funniest things, not dumb, funniest. Folks, when you read the book of John, those people had a story to tell, and that's what John was emphasizing. You and I have accepted Jesus Christ by faith. We need to have that relationship. We need to get out there and we need to share Jesus Christ. And we need to talk and share the words of Jesus Christ. We need to share what Jesus has shared with us and things. Now, I do want to tell you, as you share, sometimes you can do it better. And we need to learn about Jesus Christ. That's the reason we read the Bible. That's the reason we get books like we just passed the little marker thing. Did that thing get all around? That's the reason we get books like that so that we could read them and find out things to share with people about Jesus Christ and His saving grace. We get ideas from them. You know, I was in the gym here the other day. You know, I go to the gym about 5 times a day, sometimes 6. Well, I go a day too. Okay, a week. Anyway, you know, yeah, I go about 5 or 6 times a week. Anyway, but I'm there, you know, quite often. Now, you know, several years ago, I had somebody ask me if I wanted to get some exercise and stuff and get a trainer that would help me learn some stuff and things about exercising. And I said, you know, I just don't have time for that. I said, I don't have time to do that. I got church members that I got to take care of. And I got to go and see them. And he looked at me and he says, what are you going to do and who's going to do it when you drop dead over here? Well, when he put it that way, I thought maybe I could find some time. And so we got together and we went to his house and had some other people come in there and had a trainer come in there. And it was interesting. That trainer taught us how to do some exercises that were good. And they were good for us. After a while, some of us dropped out of that and didn't need the trainer, but I kept going to the gym. You know, I been going to the gym for a long time, but then, you know, we had a class here, how to reverse diabetes. Now, I hadn't got to where I had the diabetes yet, but I was getting close, you know, and I was getting a little older. And our sister got up front here, and she taught us how we could do some exercise, that you could do it a little differently, and you would start losing weight. I'd been going several years, exercising, think I'd lose some weight, and I kept exercising and exercising and exercising, and I got stronger and stronger, and I ate what Bernita fixed me, and I got stronger and stronger, and I was really in good shape, but I wasn't losing any weight. It kept just staying about on me, you know, pretty good. But our sister here got up front here, and she told me how I could do exercise a different way, and I could lose weight. Spend the same time at the gym, but do exercise a little different. I thought she was a little crazy. Sometimes when she gets up front, I wonder about her too. But I took the message that she gave that week, and I went to the gym and I started doing what she said. 5 times a week, I would do what she had told me to do. It was interesting. After about 2 months, a couple of you said, you know, you look like you lost a little bit of weight. The scales at the gym didn't always say that, but y'all said that it looked like it. After about 4 months, you said it looks like you've lost a little bit of weight. The scales at the gym were beginning to tell the truth. I had lost almost 30 pounds, just changing the exercise. Now, you know, I tell you that story, folks, because it's something simple, you know. But what's in the Bible about Jesus Christ, it's something that is simple. We can learn it. We need to be learning it. We need to follow His words. We need to be going out and sharing it with other people. It's simple, but we got to go do it. We just can't say, well, that's okay for somebody else. If we're going to put in the time, we can do it. I want to ask you, by the grace of God, to say, I'm going to spend time studying God's Word. I'm going to spend time putting it in practice in my life. I'm going to spend time having a relationship with Jesus Christ, even if it means for me to ride the train a whole hour over to one side of town and then the bus a little bit farther. I'm going to spend time with Jesus Christ. And then take that time and put it into practice, where you're sharing your story, like the woman at the well, of what God has done and is doing for you. You can do it right now. Let's take our hymnal and let's turn for our closing song, Blessed Assurance, Jesus is Mine. Numbers 462.